Sidekicks, the weekly cybersecurity podcast hosted by Richmond Advisor Group's principal analysts, namely me, Rory Duncan.
And me, Christina Richmond. This podcast is your go-to partner for understanding the cybersecurity market, industry trends, and the real-world challenges of protecting organizations today. Rory, how are you?
Hi, Christina. I'm not too bad today. Thank you very much for asking. And it's a special day today, a special week this week, isn't it?
Is it? Is it? Is it?
Yes, it is.
What is it?
It's our 40th episode.
Not every 10 episodes can be special, Rory.
It's
40.
It is.
It's not 50. It's not a big birthday.
Well,
it's just a midlife, middle-aged birthday.
Anniversary. Okay, fair enough. I promise not to get too excited.
But happy 40th.
Yes.
So what do we have cooked up for the 40th episode?
Well, a number of things. And it's been a week for AWS, Amazon Web Services for sure, hasn't it?
Ouch.
Yes, out.
Yes.
We examine what happened with the outages reported by many AWS customers this week and the knock-on effect, this kind of cascading effect it had on the internet.
Yes,
we look
I like that knock-on instead of, I use dominoes quite a bit, but yes, the knock-on effect.
A knock-on effect. But also we look at what the causes were and perhaps how they can be mitigated against. And I know we've got a lot of background material on that as well. What else have we got, Christina?
Yeah, so it's interesting how these two intersect. So the government of the Netherlands did this unusual, dramatic move where they took over a China-owned chip manufacturing plant. So they were citing national security concerns. But there's an overlap here because dependence on U.S. hyperscalers like AWS, and then some pressure from the U.S.
Yes, indeed.
To the Netherlands. Yeah, right. So we'll get into that. Then we have a guest, right? We have a lovely guest.
Yes.
Who do we have this week?
This week's guest is Sean Deuby, who's a principal technologist at Semperis, and we'll be chatting with Sean about identity management and protection, as well as what keeps him up at night. Now, Sean is a colleague of Simon Hodgkinson, who we've had on a couple of times, so it'll be great to hear Sean's perspective, and he's got a rich and varied history in the technology side of things.
Well, and it may even carry over from the AWS outage because it was their identity servers or database, rather, that was compromised. So, or not compromised. I shouldn't use that word. I should be careful. There was a misconfiguration error or logic error. So it wasn't really compromised, but yes. So just a quick reminder, folks, if you haven't signed up for Signal Not Noise, our newsletter, it's a free newsletter. It's meant to be monthly. We're sort of skipping a month here for a lot of reasons, but just hang in there with us. Sign up for Signal Not Noise, and you'll get a 4-page extract from our spring AI security survey, where we looked at how prepared CISOs, C-suite, and senior IT practitioners are in facing AI-powered attacks and what would help them prepare. So join us on the journey, and we look forward to getting your feedback on that.
Great. Thank you, Christina. This week's special guest is Sean Deuby, Principal Technologist at Semperis. Welcome, Sean. Thanks for being on the show. We've had Simon Hodgkinson on a couple of times now, part of your group, although he does have a kind of an advisory role at Semperis, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. And thanks for having me, Roy and Christina. Yeah, Simon is a strategic advisor for us. Great guy. Wonderful to hear his perspective than our other strategic advisors because they have the big picture. Simon, he was CISO for BP, and boy, that's a level of experience that I certainly, when he has things to say to talk about large enterprise, I definitely stop what I'm doing and listening.
He's super interesting to listen to, and he's a great chatter. We had a wonderful chat. We just went back and forth and really round robin quite a bit with him, and so it was great to have him on, and it is great to have you on. Sean, thank you so much. Tell us a little bit about your background, would you, for our listeners?
Sure. And I like to use the tagline, and I apologize if people have heard this before, that I've been doing Microsoft identity as long as Microsoft has been doing identity. So I go back to the Windows NT and even before that, but we won't go there because then I sound really old. Yeah, yeah. But I mean, really, I've been doing identity for most of my career. And specifically, I was one of the original architects of Intel's Active Directory and then worked on it, ran it, and helped. And at the end of that, led it for about 10 years. And, other companies. And as we were just talking about a few minutes ago, time as a technology journalist. So I got the privilege, though I didn't realize it at the time, to begin covering identity at what we then called IDaaS, Identity as a Service, and is now known as simply Cloud Identity. Back when it was just beginning and you would look at it and you go, who in their right mind would outsource their identity to some third party out in some sketchy thing called the cloud? And yet here we are, right?
Yeah, you've just summed that up, haven't you? That whole journey. You took me back right away. IDaaS.
Right. I mean, when was the
I was
last
like,
time you
right,
heard
I
that?
remember that. Yeah, when was the last time I heard that? It's been a while. And that whole sketchy area called the cloud. Yeah. And there's so many things we can compare to that now, right? We can compare the adoption of AI and agentic AI and some automation in the SOC. Oh, they'll never do that. They'll never allow for response in the SOC, by agents. That's what we said about cloud. Nobody would put all of their architecture into the cloud. It'll never happen. It's not secure enough. And well, some of our fears were borne out this week. And so when I would usually ask what keeps you up at night, I might have an answer for some people out there who suffered from the AWS outage.
Right.
Did you have any thoughts on that outage? Because it was a big one.
It was a big
And it
one.
was
And
identity. It was identity based as well.
well, and of course, for our deep technical team at Semperis, we're identity folks, as you say. And if you've been in the identity business for very long, there's a meme that's been around forever, and it's called the DNS haiku. And it's a screenshot, and it looks like it's got a nice sort of a Japanese background, and it says, "It can't be DNS. There's no way it's DNS. It was DNS."
Okay, I found it, and you're very close. It's not DNS. There's no way it's DNS. It was DNS. So you
And
were
it
spot
was.
on. And it
So
was.
and I'm thinking of the AWS as an example of a larger trend, which is, and we talked in the beginning about going to the cloud and how and
Yeah,
nobody would do it. And these things tend to swing in a pendulum. And so what we've had, the cloud will solve everything for you, one size fits all, or we have three sizes for you. It will be great. It will be wonderful. And of course, that turned out to not be true. And then we had it swung to, okay, well, you'll have the cloud, but we'll have this thing called a private cloud that you can spend a lot of money on. Like, when's the last time you heard anybody in their private cloud? I mean, I haven't, but and then we swung to the middle and we have a hybrid environment where you have on-prem, which is not going away anytime soon, and you have cloud resources and single sign-on to a whole host of SaaS applications. So the pendulum swings. And so we had specifically in the cloud, it's everything's good, everything's bad. And now we have, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't put all our eggs in one cloud service
right,
provider,
right.
multi-cloud.
I love that. I think you're spot on. And I think there's also the pendulum of I have to do it all myself. I have to configure everything, build everything, secure everything myself. And the other side of the pendulum is, oh, cloud is secure enough. I'm going to put it in the cloud. I'm going to be in this shared responsibility model, which I am going to dupe myself into thinking is safer, and maybe I don't need to share as much responsibility, meaning taking my own responsibility, and allow the cloud provider to just secure me. And if you read through some of the literature on AWS's site, I mean, they're very squarely putting that shared responsibility model back onto some of their customers, saying, in order to avoid this kind of outage, you should or could have done this. They're not saying it in those words, but that's kind of how it comes off when you look at this outage in a historical perspective. And that's difficult because I think a lot of companies like to set it and forget it. We're
Oh,
busy.
absolutely.
We want to focus on
Absolutely.
our business. Yeah.
Right. In this, there's the availability aspects that you referred to, and also the areas that I focus on a little more, the security aspects of it, specifically identity security. But the security aspects of it are, oh, I'll just use the defaults. And
Yeah.
there are a lot of parallels. I mean, at least again, I'm in the Microsoft world, and so I think of Entra ID and
Yeah.
on-prem Active Directory and all that. And I'm sure it's similar for AWS, which is the defaults that we're going to put in there are the ones that are most likely going to work well for you with some degree of security, but not as secure as you might like to have it because things will break. And so
That's right.
we
Yeah.
have this secure-ish by default, but with plenty
Yeah.
of holes and plenty of places for things to go wrong unless you do that extra due diligence
Mm.
to both set it up that way and also to monitor to make sure that you don't fall out of that configuration.
Would it be a good idea, Christina, just to mention a couple of things we were going to talk about on this news story? Because
Oh,
clearly we're
yeah.
kind of right in the middle of this discussion now.
Well,
And
if
I hope you
Sean
don't
is
mind, Sean.
willing.
Yeah, if you're
Yeah,
into
if you're
that, we can
willing.
talk about it a bit.
Sure.
Great.
Sure.
Well, here's one of the things, Sean, because we did some digging. I did some digging in the depths of the AWS archives in their white papers and their appendixes. They've got Appendix A, Partitional Service Guidance, and this is a kind of a what you should do in case of these situations. It describes how some AWS services are partitional, meaning they exist separately in each AWS partition, such as GovCloud and China, and they offer a control plane. For IAM, so Identity and Access Management, the global control plane is housed in US East 1, where the problem was. But the data plane is available in every region, and that manages the sign-ins and permission checks. So as an identity expert, that's you, Sean, because clearly you are, we then looked at, well, what does AWS recommend? I didn't understand it completely, but it might make sense to you. So AWS says if the IAM control plane fails, you can't make changes to users or policies, but existing users can still log in and operate normally. So STS, a security token service, isn't affected since it runs on a separate data plane. So they say, for resilience purposes, if, Mr. Customer, you are wanting to have better resilience in your infrastructure for identity purposes, it says, avoid depending on IAM's control plane during recovery. Create and securely store emergency admin credentials beforehand instead of trying to set them up during an outage.
Now, this was all written before the outage. In
Yeah.
all fairness, it was written before the outage. It's great advice. If you would have gone through the weeds, read the white papers, or had a consultant helping you build out. That's my
Right.
point of view. What do you think, Sean?
I agree. Now, let me preface this by saying I am by no means an expert on AWS identity. I'm more of a Microsoft guy. But
Right?
what
Yeah.
I'm hearing is, the source of truth, the source of updates in the IAM system in US East, that does all the changes. That does all the updates, read updates, deletes.
Right.
And so if you're out in the regions and the central system is down, you're stuck with what you have. And so, yes, you have to put your break glass accounts in there ahead of time. It's sort of a chicken and egg situation. If you haven't done it in preparation, it's too late to do anything about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that comes back to the set it and forget it, that notion of it's secure-ish. And, it does fall in the lap of the security team utilizing the services and not just allowing the default security to remain in place and making sure that you have your break glass in a safe place, off network, off AWS, if you
Right.
will.
Yeah, this is the trap that, that I jokingly describe as the wetware humans fall into, which is, you look at the pretty UI and it tells you click here, and boom, you've created it. And as you say, it's a whole different level to go dig in the docs to understand the best way to configure it. I feel for the IT and security teams because if you think about it, 10 years ago, something like that, people didn't think about, maybe 10 years is optimistic, but people didn't think about being attacked. And then a few years later, you started hearing more and more about attacks. And of course, human nature goes, yeah, that'll never happen to us. And then the way I describe it is a colleague at a company that's a lot like yours gets attacked, and it's a nightmare. And your company is looking at each other like, uh-oh, we'd better, what's an incident response team? What's what all these things, companies didn't have these things.
Right.
Maybe they had physical disaster recovery, but they did not have cyber response teams. And so you're standing up a cyber response team, you're trying to figure out what it is. Most of the industry still doesn't have it. Then it becomes, you will be attacked, and you're trying to cope with that. And how long ago has it been that it's become, you have been attacked, and you may just not know it. And then now we've moved from response to resiliency, and you're still trying to wrap your arms around managing the chaos of incident response and crisis management. And now you're being told, okay, you need to stand up a way of being resilient in the midst of an attack to keep as much of the business running as possible. And that's a rough thing to do. And that's kind of, you'd asked me earlier about what keeps me up at night. And it is around this resilience and about this cyber attacks with everybody getting it. And in terms of what keeps me up at night, it's really sort of, I have a big existential worry, and I have a smaller worry. The existential one is the penetration of our critical infrastructure by the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, and the Chinese.
Specific.
Yeah, because, and I've listened to a lot of people about this, and the Chinese, what are the Chinese Liberation Army, I think is what it's, the people that I listen to about this, they're very specific, say, look, it's not the Chinese people. It is specifically the Chinese government and these arms of the Chinese government. And if you've followed at all what's been going on with Salt Typhoon and other threat actors, nation state actors, at least in the US, the penetration is full on scary, old infrastructure. SCADA systems haven't changed for years. They weren't designed for it. And so the existential thing that keeps me up at night is that if the Chinese decide to, as one of our strategic advisors is Chris Inglis, who is the original White House cybersecurity czar, and he says if the Chinese decide to blink the lights in the U.S.,
they can.
They can, and the consequences are, they're making movies about it and all that, and actually we're making a documentary about it as well. I'm not a prepper. I haven't done anything like that, but as anyone in this business does, we do a risk analysis and we think, okay, well, if something like that happens, what does one do?
I love that you brought this up. I would add to the mix Russia and North Korea. I would add to the mix that the US has taken their eye off those balls, at least the Russian balls. I would add to the mix that at the beginning of this new administration, Salt Typhoon, that whole investigation was kind of put on hold. And the disruption that has occurred in CISA under the DHS has caused that to be, in my estimation, a very scary pause for all the reasons that you mentioned. Geopolitics has real impact here. And so it's very interesting to me, and I'm trying very carefully not to say left, right, red, blue, but I do think there are real consequences of taking your eye off the ball and not paying attention to these nation state actors. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that we're all very worried about that. It is the fact that it's the network is the battleground. And frankly, that's the battleground that's happening under our feet in our wires day in, day out. This cyber war is going on all the time, but your average person is simply just not aware of it. And I'm existentially coming back full circle to what keeps me up at night is the time, and I believe it's a when and not an if, is the time that there's going to be something like this surfaces, whether it's John Hultquist, who's the chief analyst for Mandiant, described the nation state actors, and I believe this was attributed to John. If not, I apologize. He said that Russia is like a hurricane, and they're sowing chaos and doing these things, but China is like global warming. It's there,
Huh.
it's everywhere, and it grows and it never goes away. And so,
Well,
yeah, that's my worry.
yeah. Well, look, that's on that sobering note. Do we need to probably call that, Sean? So thanks
But
very
I
much.
really, yeah, but I really would love it, Sean,
Mm,
if you'd honor us with coming back another time to get to your maybe not top existential worry, but the next ones, because you
mm,
hinted that there were others, but also to come back to this critical infrastructure and
discussion.
the
Yeah.
Chinese Liberation Army, nation state challenges. I'd love it if you'd come back.
Sure, I'd love to chat about it.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Bye bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for coming on.
So that was a great chat with Sean, wasn't it?
Oh, it really was. I wish we'd had a lot more time with him, and
Mm,
we've already booked another time with him. So, folks, if you enjoyed that, please come back in January and
mm.
listen to Sean again when he joins us. I think he'll be, when
15th,
will
was
he
it?
be?
15th of January?
15th, he's
Yeah.
recording. Yeah, so he'll be with us. It'll come out on LinkedIn on the 20th of January in
Mm,
the new year.
in
So
the new
that'll be
year.
fabulous.
Hooray. So
Thanks again, Sean. Really, that was
yeah,
terrific.
that was good. So let's talk a bit more about the AWS outage. I know you have thoughts, Christina.
I do, at first blush, it kind of looked like a DDoS attack.
Mm,
It was like this when the DNS servers are hit by a DOS or DDoS attack and they get overwhelmed and they just keep responding and responding and trying to resolve the request to go to certain URLs. It causes this shutdown. Well, that is what happened, but it wasn't caused by a hacker. It was caused by a misconfiguration. So when the services couldn't find their destinations, they retried endlessly, overwhelming AWS's DNS servers, just like an external DDoS would, right? So I found that interesting, but then I started thinking about the CrowdStrike AWS kind of comparison, right?
yeah.
Because, yeah, so we did bring this up earlier, right? We were talking about the AWS outage and comparing it to CrowdStrike's July of 24 outage, right? They're both massive global scale failures triggered by one single technical change
Mm-hmm.
that then cascaded through critical infrastructure. And it took
Yeah.
down so much of the internet
Yeah.
in the AWS example, but in CrowdStrike, it took out just as many businesses,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think the total was like $5 billion spent on that
Wow.
outage, right? But here's the comparison. So in AWS, it was an internal DS config
Mm-hmm.
that was a logic error. In CrowdStrike, it was a single faulty update to the Falcon sensor, their
Mm-hmm.
endpoint protection agency, which runs on millions of Windows systems, right? So
Yeah.
we're talking millions of users in both situations. The failure layer for AWS was obviously cloud infrastructure, right? And for CrowdStrike, it was on people's devices. It was endpoint layer. The effect was that services couldn't find what is called the DynamoDB
Mm-hmm.
or any other AWS endpoints, and so got into this repetitive cycle of trying to resolve the DNS server calls and couldn't. So it's like a DDoS attack, as I said. Whereas with CrowdStrike, it was the blue screen of death, right? It was Windows users getting onto their computer and getting the blue screen of death, or the BSOD, as it's now known
Mm-hmm.
as. And who was affected? All kinds of companies in AWS cloud, apps, websites, IoT devices, a bed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We found, what did you find? You found something about a smart bed that
Oh yeah.
was overheating.
Yeah. Smart beds that were like propped up at weird angles so people couldn't sleep, and other people were like boiling because the bed setting were set to hot. But
Oh,
I've
and they're so ticked off about it.
it
Whereas
is.
in the CrowdStrike outage, it was organizations across,
Mm,
airlines, banks, hospitals. So very similar, millions of people and businesses, thousands of businesses being affected, but for very different reasons on different layers of the tech stack, right?
mm,
It's just fascinating to me. But then you have to get back to how are you going to recover? And I think the cloud recovery is relatively quick now once that rollback occurred.
yeah.
Whereas in CrowdStrike, it was far slower. The recovery was far slower because you had to physically go delete the corrupted file and reboot. You had to have physical access. I just thought that was really interesting when I was looking at this.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think for me, the most serious effect of the AWS outage was the fact that Wordle was down. Wordle, Christina. Wordle.
No. Yeah, Wordle was down, and the bed. So those people who like to play Wordle in their
bed.
smart bed.
Yeah, that was it. You were hosed. You had to go and find something else to
do. You were overheating. Hopefully, you weren't a menopausal woman.
Oh, gee whiz!
And having been one myself, yes.
Yes. You would have been like the Human Torch.
Yes, the
on.
Human Torch. And in this bricked smart bed where you have to sit up all night playing Wordle that's not working, it would have been a really bad night.
Well, a little bit more news, and we mentioned it earlier, Christina, and this was about the Dutch government taking control, albeit temporarily, of a China-owned chip firm. And this concerns a company called Nexperia, who are a Chinese-owned chip maker based in the Netherlands. And the Dutch government decided to exercise a 74-year-old law in a bid to safeguard what they saw as the European supply of semiconductors for cars and other electronic goods to protect Europe's economic security. Now, there's been a bit of an update. Apparently, the Dutch economy minister has been chatting with China's Ministry of Commerce because China was furious, I think was the quote. But The Hague said it took the decision due to what it calls a serious governance shortcomings and to prevent the chips from becoming unavailable in an emergency. So, like we've seen in other parts of the world, security or cybersecurity has become a national security issue as opposed to an IT issue, right? It's become part of national security. And this is what happened here. As it is, the key issue is that Nexperia produces its chips in Europe, but they're mostly packaged and sold in China. And Nexperia is one of the few chip makers left in Europe. Now, how does this tie in with the US? Because obviously this is about what we mentioned earlier. It was December last year, so only 10 months ago, the US government placed Nexperia's parent company called Wingtech on its so-called entity list, right? So identifying the company as a national security concern. So they were kind of prescribed by the US. They are still existing in Europe, but selling to China. Then, under the regulations, US companies are barred from exporting American-made goods to businesses on the list unless they have special approval. So it was a very difficult situation. I don't know how it's going to pan out, but at least the Dutch can say, well, our concern is that chip production might be moved from Europe to China, and that would mean the loss of one of Europe's largest chip manufacturers. And as we know, Europe doesn't have much chip manufacturing capability. It's either in China or Taiwan and other parts of the world. So that was the situation there. I thought it was an interesting one that they used this 74-year-old law, which was brought in during wartime for, requisition and protection of goods in the country, but using it to a foreign-owned chip manufacturer.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit more to even unpack here, I think. The CEO, Zhang, of Nexperia, is shown to have placed orders with another company that was in trouble. It's a privately owned chip factory called Wing Sky Semi in China. And so court documents reveal that Zhang allegedly forced Nexperia to place orders with Wing Sky Semi for $200 million worth of wafers in 2025, despite the company only needing $70 or $80 million worth for its production. Right. So there is some other stuff going on here, and then the other thing is there was retaliation by, this is all what we're reading. I mean, who knows? We're not in the room itself. Retaliation by Zhang against dissenting executives. So when the European executives, both financial and legal executives at Nexperia, questioned the deals and opposed the misuse of these resources, Zhang fired them. Ooh. Right? So firing of executives without consulting the company's works council was a violation of Dutch corporate rules.
Yeah.
So all of that's happening on one side. There's real, stuff happening that shouldn't be happening. But then there's that geopolitical side of it, and especially the pressure from the US government that the parent company of Nexperia, WingTech, is placed on this blacklist. And so there's this subtle, not subtle pressure from my lovely government saying, don't work with these people because, they're owned by a Chinese company. And, we know right now that there's a lot of discomfort with the Chinese between American and Chinese economics and businesses. So, so I found it really interesting. I think there's a lot behind it that calls for or supports the Dutch court ruling, but also you have to also look at some of the geopolitical pressures, I think, as well.
Yes, indeed. It all comes down to that, doesn't it? Well,
sometimes.
We shall be monitoring that closely. Yes. Well, we should wrap the show.
We should wrap the show. We've been at it for a while. We had some great discussions. Roy, this was really fun. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
So, folks, if you want to be in touch, send us an email. Christina at richmondadvisorygroup.com and Rory at richmondadvisorygroup.com. Please be in touch. Give us your feedback. Let us know what you'd like to hear more of. And subscribe to the newsletter. I think that's about it. Mm-hmm. Hey, Rory, what do you think?
That's it. Short and sweet, to the point. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
look forward to you joining us again next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.